What happens when someone in Star Wars actually passes away is one of the strangest and most beautiful systems in all of fiction, and almost nobody understands how it really works. Now let us start with the baseline rule, the thing that happens to everyone. When any living thing in the Star Wars galaxy reaches the end of its life, its energy leaves what is called the living force and dissolves into something bigger called the cosmic force. This is what the phrase becoming one with the force actually means. Your energy joins the energy of everything that has ever lived. It sounds peaceful, and in a way it is. But there is a catch, and the catch is enormous. In the natural process, your identity dissolves too. Your memories fade into the whole. Your personality melts away. The person you were simply stops being a person. You become part of everything, but the you that existed is gone forever. Except there is a loophole. A very small group of Force users figured out how to keep their identity after their body was gone. These are the beings we call Force Ghosts. A Force Ghost is someone who learned to hold on to their consciousness after passing on, which lets them appear to the living, speak with them, and guide them from the other side. And the person who cracked this secret in the film era was Qui-Gon Jinn. For thousands of years, this knowledge had been lost. Qui-Gon was the first Jedi in millennia to rediscover the path to eternal consciousness, and it makes perfect sense that it was him. Qui-Gon was the rare Jedi who devoted himself to the living force. He lived fully in the present moment, while the rest of the Order buried itself in prophecy and politics. According to the official material surrounding Revenge of the Sith, Qui-Gon learned the secret from a shaman of the Whills. The Clone Wars series expanded this even further. It revealed that he trained under 5 mysterious Force priestesses, beings who existed between the living force and the cosmic force, and who had achieved eternal life themselves. Dave Filoni has even suggested that the 5 priestesses may actually be a single ancient being, perceived as 5 separate aspects: serenity, joy, anger, confusion, and sadness. So what does it take to earn this power? The requirement is absolute selflessness, compassion, and love. In the Revenge of the Sith novelization, which was written in consultation with George Lucas himself, the spirit of Qui-Gon explains that this power comes only through the release of self. You have to let go of everything you are so completely that the Force lets you keep it. And this is exactly why the ability belongs to the light side alone in most tellings. The dark side is built entirely on the exaltation of self. It is the exact opposite of the surrender this technique demands. A Sith Lord grasping for power can never open the one door that requires letting go. But here is a detail most fans miss. Qui-Gon passed away before completing his training, and that incomplete education came with a cost. He could retain his consciousness and speak from the Netherworld, but for years he could not fully manifest a visible form. That is why he exists only as a voice in Attack of the Clones and the Clone Wars. His body did not vanish either. He was cremated on Naboo because the vanishing act belongs to those who fully mastered the technique at the moment of their passing. In Revenge of the Sith, Yoda reveals the truth to Obi-Wan. An old friend had learned the path to immortality, and that friend was his former master. Yoda then commits to teaching Obi-Wan how to commune with Qui-Gon during his long exile on Tatooine. And the Clone Wars shows us how Yoda earned this knowledge himself. Guided by the voice of Qui-Gon, he traveled to Dagobah, where he confronted a living shadow of his own dark side. Then he journeyed to the wellspring world of the priestesses. And finally, he faced the ancient Sith homeworld of Moraband, where he resisted illusions and a vision of Darth Sidious himself. Then comes the payoff that cascades across the entire saga. Aboard the Death Star, Obi-Wan allows Vader to strike him down, and his body vanishes the instant the blade connects. His voice immediately guides Luke to safety. Later, he appears fully formed on Hoth and Dagobah as a shimmering blue spirit. Yoda passes peacefully on Dagobah at roughly 900 years old, fading from existence mid-sentence before joining his old friend on the other side. And then there is Anakin Skywalker, the miracle case. After decades as Darth Vader, his final act of love, saving his son and destroying the Emperor, realigned his spirit with the light. He appears at the celebration on Endor, standing beside Obi-Wan and Yoda, fully redeemed. Now these spirits are powerful, but they have limits. Ghosts are not all-knowing. They know what they knew in life, plus whatever the Force chooses to reveal. They can be surprised. They can be wrong. Obi-Wan spends 3 entire films managing information like a chess player. Manifesting also takes real effort. Distance matters, which is why Obi-Wan strains to appear on Hoth, so far from where he fell. And locations soaked in the dark side can muffle or block a spirit entirely. Their abilities still grew over time, though. Spirits have appeared to multiple people at once, sat on physical objects, and even touched the living. Yoda summons a lightning bolt in The Last Jedi. By the sequel era, the ghost of Luke Skywalker physically catches a lightsaber and raises his old X-Wing out of the sea. In Legends, the deep lore adds even more spirits to the roster, like the ancient masters Arca Jeth and Vodosiosc Bas, whose ghost helps take down his own fallen student twice across 4,000 years. And Legends also delivers a hard truth. Spirits do not linger forever. Years after Endor, the ghost of Obi-Wan bids Luke a final farewell, explaining that he must move on to a new plane of existence, and telling Luke that he loved him like a son. Even Force ghosts eventually let go. There is one more thing worth noticing, and your eyes have already seen it. Jedi spirits always appear in soft blue and white light. Sith spirits appear in reds, shadows, and distorted shapes. The visual language of the afterlife reflects its doctrine. And it all comes back to the warning Obi-Wan gave Vader on the Death Star, when he promised that being struck down would only make him more powerful than Vader could possibly comprehend. Vader could not comprehend it, because at that point, no Sith in any continuity had ever achieved what Obi-Wan was about to do freely. Vader won that duel and lost eternity. Obi-Wan lost his body and gained it. And 22 years later, aboard the second Death Star, the same trade repeated itself. This time, Anakin finally took the deal his master had offered him all along. So if a Force ghost is the exception, where does everyone else go? That question has an actual answer, and the answer is a real place. It is called the Netherworld of the Force. And this is the Star Wars afterlife proper, the realm that the souls of every being and every creature were thought to enter once their physical bodies gave out. This part matters, so let it sink in. The Netherworld is for everyone. It does not belong to the Jedi. It is not reserved for Force sensitives. The farm boy, the smuggler, the diplomat, the creature crawling through the swamps of some forgotten world, all of them are headed to the same destination. Canon-era sources have given this idea softer and more mythological names over the years. The Legends of Luke Skywalker calls it the Mist Beyond. Other material refers to it as the Garden Beyond. Different names, same shore. And in case you think this is some obscure piece of deep lore buried in an old sourcebook, the concept is confirmed on screen in Revenge of the Sith. Yoda explicitly tells Obi-Wan that Qui-Gon has returned from the Netherworld of the Force. Stop and consider what that sentence proves. It proves the Netherworld is a genuine destination that souls travel to. And it proves that a sufficiently trained soul can come back from it. The afterlife in this galaxy has a door, and that door swings both ways for the ones who earned the key. The mechanics follow the teaching we already walked through. All life belongs to the living force while it breathes. At the moment of passing, that energy scatters into the cosmic force. The Netherworld is where that transition leads. Think of it as the far shore of existence, the place waiting on the other side of the crossing. For ordinary beings, arriving there appears to mean the gentle dissolution of individual identity into peace. That is becoming one with the Force in the fullest sense of the phrase. But trained light side spirits experience something completely different. For them, the end of the body is a release. They are freed into the Netherworld, able to move between that realm and the physical galaxy whenever they are needed. Hold on to that word, freed. Because the spirits of the Sith get the opposite experience, and we will be spending a lot of time with them very soon. Legends actually lets us peek inside this realm. In the Empire's End comics from the Dark Empire era, two young siblings named Danin and Vila are shown within the Netherworld after their passing. And who is waiting there to greet them? Yoda. His spirit welcomes the two of them and promises to train them. Take a moment with that image. The afterlife in Star Wars has teachers. A youngling who never got the chance to learn among the living can still be taught on the other side by the greatest master the Jedi Order ever produced. The truce at Bakura adds a far more painful glimpse. Shortly after the events of Endor, the newly redeemed spirit of Anakin Skywalker appears before Leia. He begs her forgiveness for everything Vader did, and Leia refuses him. Her father crossed back from the beyond itself to apologize, and the answer was still no. Even on the other side of existence, some wounds refuse to close on command. Expanded Universe material also describes how Anakin managed to become a spirit at all, since he never trained under the Wills or the Priestesses. After Endor, Obi-Wan met Anakin's consciousness and offered to guide him in retaining his identity. The films keep it simpler. His redemption realigned him with the light, and his two old masters finished the job from the other side. Either way, the man walked through the door because someone he loved was holding it open. Now, not everyone in this galaxy believes any of this. Darth Plagueis, the Sith who dedicated his entire existence to conquering mortality, flatly rejected the Netherworld as a supernatural realm. In his view, the so-called peace of the beyond was just a mind dissipating into background energy and quietly accepting its own annihilation. He believed only the weak would tolerate the loss of their identity. Remember that philosophy. it is the seed of everything his apprentice Palpatine would eventually become, and it drives some of the darkest schemes in this entire story. And Plagueis was wrong about more than he knew, because the Netherworld is bigger and stranger than a simple resting place. This afterlife has geography. Legend sources describe Chaos, the Sith Hell, as a region within the Netherworld itself, a dark corner where fallen spirits are consigned. We are opening that particular gate in the next chapter. Disney canon adds its own wrinkle, and it is almost like physics for the soul. The hidden Sith world Exegol sits on a vergence, a place where the boundary between the living world and the Netherworld runs thin. That thinness explains why the dead are so loud there. It is how the shattered spirit of Palpatine could cling to existence on that world. And it is why Rey, standing at her lowest moment, could hear generations of departed Jedi rallying to her side. Some places in the galaxy are closer to the far shore than others. What is remarkable is how early this whole idea took root in the saga itself. In George Lucas's rough draft material for The Empire Strikes Back, Yoda appears to Luke in a dream and explains that he will soon join Ben in the Netherworld, where he will become stronger and better able to help. From the very beginning, the afterlife in Star Wars was designed as an upgrade. The vocabulary shifts across the decades, from the Netherworld of Unbeing in the Revenge of the Sith novelization, to the Cosmic Force framework of the Clone Wars, to Exegol texts describing the Force as a twisted ribbon lining the edge of all reality. But they all sketch the same picture. A real plane pressed up against our own, thin in some places and thick in others. Time may not behave normally over there either. Qui-Gon needed years to learn how to manifest after crossing over. Obi-Wan spoke to Luke within minutes of falling on the Death Star. The difference between them was preparation. Qui-Gon had to finish his education after his passing, while Obi-Wan and Yoda completed their training among the living. Crossing over prepared changes everything. And then there is the question the galaxy itself cannot answer. Legends repeatedly hints that all life joins the cosmic force, yet only Force sensitives have ever demonstrably communicated back across the line. So is Uncle Owen at peace somewhere on that far shore, or is he gone? No theologian in the galaxy can say for certain. That uncertainty is exactly why in-universe faiths exist at all, from the Church of the Force to Corellian myths about the end of life, to the Naboo stories of the gates of chaos. When the truth sits just out of reach, people build religions in the gap. Because quietly, without most fans ever noticing, Star Wars assembled a complete cosmology of what comes next. There is a universal afterlife waiting for everyone. There is a peace resembling heaven for the selfless. There is a hell for the damned. And there is one narrow, hard-earned path for those who want to come back. We have covered the peace. Now it is time to talk about the hell. In the opening minutes of A New Hope, Darth Vader snarls a curse at Captain Antilles, telling him that chaos can take his mission. Most fans hear that line and think nothing of it. But Vader just referenced hell because Star Wars has one. It is called chaos, and in universe, people literally call it hell. Corellian mythology names the realm exactly that. Other traditions know it as the void. and characters across the galaxy swear by it constantly. People ask what in chaos is going on. They tell their enemies to go to chaos. The entire galaxy casually curses by its own version of damnation, and almost nobody watching ever notices. So what is this place? Legend sources define chaos as a reputedly dark realm that the spirits of fallen Dark Lords of the Sith were believed to inhabit instead of the Netherworld proper. Other tellings describe it a little differently as the darkest region within the Netherworld itself. Either way, the destination is the same. While the selfless dissolve into peace on the far shore, the darkest souls in the galaxy get pulled somewhere else entirely. The most vivid picture of it comes from Naboo, of all places. Naboo mythology describes chaos as a black pit sealed shut by 6 impenetrable gates. Sit with the strangeness of that for a second. Beneath the folklore of the most beautiful and peaceful planet in the galaxy is a locked hell. And what happens to the souls sent down there is genuinely disturbing. Banished dark-siders are said to wander chaos in perpetual madness. They exist without bodies. They drift without form. They hold no power at all. There are no thrones waiting for them, and there is no dark paradise as a reward for their ambition. What waits is an eternity of screaming static, a formless forever where the mind never stops unraveling. Once you understand that, the entire psychology of the Sith snaps into focus. The dark side's obsession with immortality runs through everything they do. The essence transfers, the clone bodies, the talismans with souls sealed inside, the resurrection rituals, all of it. And the obvious reading is that this is a lust for power. But it is really something much simpler. It is terror. Every Sith Lord knows exactly what is waiting for them if they truly perish. They built their entire lives on domination and the exaltation of self, and the bill for that comes due on the other side. Palpatine himself confirms this. During the Dark Empire era, the Emperor privately feared that his final end would drop his soul into chaos, where he would drift as a wandering, disembodied spirit trapped in permanent madness. The most powerful Sith in the history of the galaxy was afraid of hell. Later in this story, we will watch that fear come true. Here is where things get scary in a different way, though. Chaos is not escape-proof. The gates have failed before, because spirits have been summoned out of the pit by the living. On the planet Onderon, a king named Omin pulled the spirit of a Dark Lord called Freedon Nadd back from chaos during an uprising nearly 4,000 years before the films. That is dark side necromancy dragging a damned soul back through the gates, and we will meet Freedon Nadd properly soon, because his story is one of the wildest in all of Star Wars. And during the new Sith Wars, a Sith acolyte was said to have summoned a monstrous warlord known as the Dark Underlord up from chaos to lead armies in the flesh. Some believed this creature was the spirit of Zendor, the very first fallen Jedi. The oldest traitor in Jedi history, possibly walking the battlefield again thousands of years after his end, pulled straight out of hell by a student with a ritual. At this point, the full map of the Star Wars afterlife is taking shape, so let us spell out the 3 paths clearly. Jedi who master selflessness are freed into the light, able to return and guide the living. Ordinary souls dissolve into peace on the far shore, and dark-siders who lived by domination are claimed by chaos, unless they cheat. That single word is the key to everything that follows in this video. Every Sith ghost you are about to meet, every haunted tomb, every clone body, and every stolen host from here forward is a Dark Lord's desperate scramble to avoid the Six Gates. And that reframes the entire dark side of this mythology. Where exactly the border sits between being trapped in chaos and being trapped somewhere else is deliberately murky. Think about the spirits anchored to tombs and temples across the galaxy. Are they in chaos, or are they hiding from it? Legends implies that all the anchoring tricks we are about to explore are really ways of refusing the summons, which means every haunted temple in the galaxy is actually a fugitive's hideout. Chaos is the warrant that never expires, and the dead are on the run. There is a delicious irony buried in the doctrine too. Darth Plagueis, the great skeptic we met earlier, treated even chaos with contempt in his private writings. To him, tales of a punishing hell were just as much sentimental myth as tales of a peaceful netherworld. Yet his own apprentice, the strongest Sith who ever lived, believed in it enough to build a galaxy-spanning insurance policy against it. When Palpatine turns out to be more religious than you are, the doctrine clearly has teeth. What nobody in the galaxy ever settled is who actually qualifies for damnation. In-universe scholars argue about it. Full Dark Lords are obviously headed down. But what about Jedi who lean dark without falling completely? What about the Sith who find redemption before the end? The galaxy never codified the rules, and later in this story, one famous case will suggest the Force judges the final state of a soul. That would make the Star Wars hell strangely merciful compared to the traditions that inspired it. And one last detail from Naboo deserves attention before we move on, because it changes how you should picture those 6 gates. Gates do not exist to make prisoners suffer. Gates exist to keep things in. The real fear at the heart of that mythology was never that the wicked are punished down in the pit. The fear was that they might get out. And given that King Omen and that new Sith Wars acolyte both managed to pull souls through, the folk religion of a quiet mid-rim world turns out to be the most accurate theology in the entire galaxy. The gates can be opened, the damned can return, and the Sith spent thousands of years perfecting the art of never being locked behind them in the first place. That art begins with a chain. Grave robbers on the Sith homeworld of Korriban do not fight security systems. They fight the dead. And to understand why, you need to understand the single most elegant and brutal piece of symmetry in all of Star Wars metaphysics. Jedi spirits are freed by the end of their lives. Sith spirits are trapped by it. A Jedi becomes a ghost through release, letting go of the self so completely that the Force allows them to keep it. A Sith ghost exists through refusal. It is a selfish, white-knuckled denial of the end, and that denial anchors the spirit to the physical world like a hand that will not open. But refusing to pass on comes with a requirement. If a Sith spirit will not cross to the far shore, it must chain itself to something on this side. And Legends lore shows us exactly 2 kinds of anchor. The first kind is objects. Think of the Moor Talisman, an amulet housing the spirit of an ancient Sith named Karnes Moor. Think of the Sith amulets carried by Ulic Qel-Droma, or the holocrons of Dark Lords like Darth Andedu. The second kind is places. Tombs, temples, and locations soaked so deeply in the dark side that they become wells of power. The tomb of Freedon Nadd, the massive temples of Exar Kun on the moon of Yavin 4, the burial valleys of Korriban itself. Every one of these names is coming back later in this story, so keep them in your pocket. Now here is the cost of the chain, and it is a steep one. A Sith spirit generally cannot travel. A Jedi ghost can appear across the galaxy to anyone they knew in life. A Sith ghost haunts its anchor like a prisoner pacing a cell, and that pacing often lasts for millennia. Which brings us back to Korriban, because that world is the great haunted necropolis of the galaxy. Its Valley of the Dark Lords holds generations of Sith rulers, entombed with their rage fully intact. Their spirits whisper from inside their sarcophagi. Their resting places are guarded by ancient traps and by hound-like creatures called Tukata, twisted through Sith alchemy into something monstrous. Walk into one of those tombs looking for treasure, and the thing hunting you is not a machine. It is the previous owner. And you need to understand what these spirits actually do with their endless time, because they are not sitting quietly. Sith spirits are predators in their afterlife. Denied bodies of their own, they seduce, they tempt, and they possess. Their pitch never really changes across the thousands of years we see them operate. Free me and I will give you power. Feed me and I will give you power. Lend me your flesh and I will give you power. And every single Sith resurgence across galactic history traces back to some fool who listened. But these predators have a weakness, and it explains nearly everything they do. They fade. Without worshippers, without sacrifices, without a strong dark side wellspring feeding them, Sith spirits weaken across the centuries. Eternity as a whisper in an empty tomb is a slow starvation. That is why so many of them scheme for resurrection or a host body instead of settling in as a haunt. Even Palpatine paid his respects to this ancient system. Years after Endor, trapped in a failing clone body he could not replace, the Emperor descended into the Valley of the Dark Lords to consult the ancient spirits directly, and those spirits handed him his final monstrous plan. We are getting to that story, and it is worse than you think. The Possession playbook itself comes in several distinct flavors, and Legends shows us the full range. There is outright body theft, which a Dark Lord named Marka Ragnos pulls off through a willing vessel. There is domination through an object, which Karnes Moor inflicts on anyone wearing his talisman. There is whisper corruption stretched across years, which Exar Kun uses on a young student named Kip Duron. And there is dynastic parasitism, where Freedon Nadd farms his own bloodline for generations while shopping for a vessel. 4 different methods, but one common thread runs through every case. The spirit always needs an invitation. Ambition cracks the door open. Grief cracks it open. Greed cracks it open. And once the door is cracked, the dead walk through. So how do the living fight back against something like that? The galaxy developed real answers over time. You can build containment architecture, like the armored mausoleums a Jedi Master named Arka Jeth engineered specifically to hold a spirit inside. You can sever the anchor entirely, the way heroes eventually shatter the scepter of Ragnos and destroy the Moor talisman. You can starve the wellspring feeding the ghost. You can overwhelm it with a massed light side ritual. And in the rarest cases of all, you can talk the spirit into letting go. In Star Wars, exorcism is an engineering discipline, and every one of those techniques gets used somewhere in the chapters ahead. That rarest method deserves its own moment, because it produced the exception that proves every rule in this chapter. His name was Ajunta Pal, and he was the first Dark Lord of the Sith. His spirit haunted his own tomb on Korriban for thousands of years, but not in rage, in regret. Around 4,000 years before the films, an amnesiac former Sith named Revan walked into that tomb and came face to face with the ancient ghost. And Paul, weary of darkness, after all those centuries, asked a question no Dark Lord had ever asked. He wanted to know whether redemption was still possible for him. In the telling where things go right, Paul renounced the dark side and finally found peace, his spirit released at last. Even a damned Sith soul can, in rare cases, choose the light and be freed. The door out of the cell was unlocked the entire time. The prisoner just had to stop gripping the bars. The light side has its own quiet exceptions running the other direction, by the way. Light side spirits sometimes linger at powerful force locations, and in places where the force runs strong enough, it can manifest untrained spirits all on its own. One of those locations becomes the site of the single most horrifying event in this whole story, and we will stand inside it soon. There is even a stranger resident of the dark afterlife worth meeting before we move on. On Dagobah, the cave steeped in the dark side hosted something called a dark spirit, a shapeless manifestation that wore the face of Palpatine when it confronted Yoda and the face of Vader when it confronted Luke. Whether it was a dead thing or the dark side itself dreaming, nobody can say. But it proves the darkness does not need a name to haunt you. And the darkness does not limit itself to people either. It corrupts real estate. The haunted census of this galaxy is staggering. Korriban with its tomb spirits by the dozen. Yavin 4, layered with the legacy of Naga Sadow and later Exar Kun. Duxin, where Freedon Nadd's relocated tomb kept radiating power. Onderon, with a dark wellspring beneath its capital. Ambria, where Sith refugees perished into the planet's dark energies and left behind a poisoned lake that a Jedi Master named Thon spent his whole life containing. Add strongholds like Thule and Vyun, soaked in residue, the witch world of Dathomir, with an entire ecosystem of spirit energy, plus Malachor, Exegol, and that cave on Dagobah. Half the map is haunted. So here is the rule of thumb to carry through the rest of this timeline. Every Sith ghost you are about to meet is serving a self-imposed sentence. They wanted to live forever, and they got exactly what they asked for. Their immortality is the punishment, and the first inmate we need to visit is the one whose ghost crowned kings. 5,000 years before Luke Skywalker was born, two Sith Lords stood dueling over an open grave, and the man they were burying rose up to stop them. That is how the story of Marka Ragnos begins, and Ragnos is the gold standard of Sith spirits. He was a Dark Lord so mighty that his ghost shaped galactic history for over 5,000 years after his heart stopped beating. To appreciate the ghost, you first need to appreciate the man. Ragnos was a tyrant of mixed heritage, half Sith and half human, who clawed his way to the title of Dark Lord of the Sith during the Golden Age of the old Sith Empire. He ruled for roughly a century of dark side dominance from the twin seats of Korriban and Ziost. 100 years at the top of the most vicious hierarchy in the galaxy is an achievement almost nobody else can claim. And when his reign finally ended around 5,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, he immediately demonstrated that the end of his life barely inconvenienced him. Picture his funeral in the Valley of the Dark Lords. His tomb has just been sealed, and already 2 of his would-be successors are fighting over his mantle right there in the valley. Their names were Naga Sado and Ludo Kresh, and as their duel raged, the towering spirit of Ragnos himself erupted out of the freshly closed tomb and physically separated them. The Sith Empire watched its ruler return from beyond within hours of his burial, and what he said to them turned out to be prophecy. The ghost warned that the Sith Empire stood at a crossroads and that the wrong move against the newly discovered Republic could doom everything they had built. Naga Sado heard that warning from the mouth of a dead god and ignored it anyway. He launched the Great Hyperspace War, and that war burned the old Sith Empire to the ground. So the very first thing Ragnos experienced as a spirit was watching his own empire ignore him into ruin. For the next 1,000 years after that disaster, his spirit brooded inside his Korriban tomb, and that tomb grew into a dark side wellspring so potent that later generations of Sith made pilgrimages just to stand near it. Then came the comeback, and it might be the single most dramatic entrance in Sith history. Nearly 1,000 years after his burial, 2 fallen Jedi named Exar Kun and Ulic Qel-Droma were dueling in the streets of Sinagar on the world of Empress Teta. Both men carried ancient Sith amulets, and when those amulets clashed, their combined energies tore open a manifestation of Ragnos himself. The ancient spirit stopped the duel cold. He declared that a new Sith Golden Age had arrived, and then he performed a coronation from beyond the grave. Ragnos anointed Exar Kun as the new Dark Lord of the Sith and named Ulic Qel-Droma his apprentice, branding the foreheads of both men with the mark of Sith heirship. Understand what that actually means. The Great Sith War, one of the most catastrophic conflicts in all of galactic history, was formally launched by a dead man. Armies marched, worlds burned, and the entire Jedi Order was thrown into a generational struggle, all because a ghost stepped out of a duel and handed 2 young men a crown. His tomb never lost its pull either. For millennia afterward, Korriban's Sith Academy in the Old Republic era treated the Valley of the Dark Lords as its final exam. Students were sent crawling through those tombs to prove themselves, and the resident spirits and guardian beasts inside decided who passed and who never came back out. A dead Dark Lord was still shaping the Sith curriculum thousands of years after his reign. Even Palpatine paid tribute across the span of 5 millennia. The Emperor's own book of Sith writings covered the locked treasures sealed inside Korriban's tombs, and his desperate final pilgrimage after Endor walked the very same valley floor where the ghost of Ragnos first rose. The Sith afterlife has an unbroken chain of custody stretching from 5,000 years before the films all the way into the New Republic era. Ragnos is the first link in that chain, and his spirit endured right into the film era itself. A full decade after Endor, a remnant of the Empire Reborn movement spawned a Sith cult with one purpose. They called themselves the Disciples of Ragnos, and they were led by a dark Jedi named Tavion Axmis. Her plan was full necromancy on a galactic scale. Using an artifact called the Scepter of Ragnos, the cult traveled the galaxy, siphoning raw force energy from its most powerful sites, collecting everything needed to pour the ancient spirit back into a living vessel. And look at their target list, because it reads like a tour of this entire video. They drained the temples of Yavin 4, which you will soon learn served as the prison of Exar Kun. They drained the cave on Dagobah. They drained Biss, a world Palpatine had turned into a reservoir of dark side power. They hit Bakura, Blengil, Chandrila, Corellia, and Taspir III, and they finished on Korriban itself. Tavion was strip mining every haunted site in the galaxy and pouring the proceeds into one dead man. The ritual reached its climax inside the tomb of Ragnos himself. Tavion offered her own body as the vessel, and the ancient Dark Lord's spirit flooded into her, wielding his own scepter through her hands. After 5,000 years, Marka Ragnos was walking again. It lasted minutes. Students from Luke Skywalker's academy crashed the resurrection, and one of them, a young Jedi named Jaden Korr, struck Tavion down and shattered the scepter. That single act severed the anchor. The roaring spirit of Ragnos was banished back into his sarcophagus, back toward chaos. 5,000 years of menace slammed shut inside a stone box. And here is the accuracy note that makes it all the more unsettling. In every continuity, the spirit of Ragnos never achieved true resurrection. Each attempt was interrupted before it could finish. As far as Legends is concerned, he remains in that tomb to this day, waiting for the next fool with a scepter and a dream. This is why Ragnos matters so much to the bigger picture. He proves the Sith afterlife has nothing to do with retirement. For a sufficiently powerful Dark Lord, the end of the body is just a change of tactics. Ragnos ruled with an army while he lived, and then ruled through cults, relics, heirs, and possession after he fell, operating across a span of time no living being could ever match. But as loud as his legend is, Ragnos was not the most successful ghost of his kind. That title belongs to a spirit who did not just influence history from a tomb. He ruled an entire planet from one, whispering from beneath a throne for 400 years. His name was Freedon Nadd, and his story is next. On most worlds, when a king passes away, the crown moves on to the living. On the planet Onderon, the crown stayed exactly where it was. For 400 years, an entire civilization took its orders from a tomb. If Ragnos was the loudest Sith ghost, Freedon Nadd was the most successful one, because Ragnos influenced history from his grave, while Nadd governed from his. His story starts as a familiar tragedy. Around 4,400 years before the Battle of Yavin, Nadd was a gifted Jedi apprentice who wanted the rank of Jedi Knight on his own timetable. The Order refused him, and in his fury he struck down his own master and went hunting for dark side power to replace everything the Jedi had denied him. His search carried him to the jungle moon of Yavin 4, and what he found there should have been impossible. Naga Sadow was waiting for him. The same Naga Sadow who ignored the ghost of Ragnos, launched the Great Hyperspace War, and lost it 6 centuries earlier. The defeated Dark Lord had preserved himself in Sith suspended animation, sleeping through 600 years of history. Nadd woke a living fossil of the old empire and became his student. He absorbed everything Sadow could teach. The sorcery, the alchemy, the buried secrets of a fallen civilization, all of it passed from the old master to the new apprentice. And then Nadd honored Sith tradition perfectly. He ended his ancient teacher and walked away with his treasures. Apparently, the customs of Sith apprenticeship can survive even a 600-year nap. Armed with knowledge no one alive could match, Nadd traveled to Onderon and installed himself as king of the walled city of Iziz. He ruled there as a dark side god king for over a century, and his power only deepened as the decades stacked up. Then, around 4350, before the Battle of Yavin, his body finally gave out, and he kept ruling. His spirit anchored itself to his tomb beneath Iziz, and from that tomb he whispered guidance, sorcery, and dark side doctrine up to his descendants on the throne for the next 350 years and beyond. Onderon transformed into a haunted house the size of a planet. The royal line worshipped their departed ancestor. The tomb beneath the city swelled into a wellspring of dark side power, and the aristocracy of Iziz practiced Sith rites handed down quite literally by a corpse. Generation after generation of royalty grew up learning at the feet of a great-great-grandfather who had been in the ground for centuries. By 4,000 years before the films, the Whispering King had refined his operation into something truly cold. His spirit was tutoring 2 students at once, King Omen and Queen Aminoa. And he was deliberately playing his royal pupils against each other, testing which of the 2 was strong enough to serve as the vessel for his physical resurrection. He was not mentoring his family. He was auditioning bodies. Omen threw himself into the training so deeply that the dark side hollowed out his own frame. The king's body failed him entirely, and he ended up permanently fused into a mechanical exoskeleton that kept him breathing. A ruler more machine than man, sustained by a rig of metal and wires 4,000 years before anyone had heard the name Vader. Meanwhile, the loan Aminoa had taken out was still accruing interest, and the collector was closer than anyone realized. The galaxy finally intervened when the Jedi arrived to mediate Onderon's beast wars. Among the peacekeepers was a young knight named Ulic Keldroma, years before his own fall, and the Jedi quickly discovered they had walked into open warfare against a dead man. The breaking of the haunting fell to Jedi Master Arca Jeth. When Jeth unleashed the full weight of the light side against the Naddists at the climax of the conflict, the results exposed exactly how deep the ghost's hooks ran. The dark side energy sustaining Queen Aminoa was stripped away in an instant, and Nadd's star pupil collapsed on the spot, gone before she hit the floor. Her life had functionally been running on borrowed power from a ghost, and the loan was called in all at once. Jeth then did something no one had attempted before. He had Nadd's remains and artifacts moved off-world entirely, relocated to the jungle moon of Duxon, and sealed inside armored mausoleums engineered for one purpose: containing the spirit. This was the birth of anti-ghost architecture, a tomb designed as a cage. The cage held the body. it never held the influence. 2 years shy of 4 millennia before the films, Naddist cultists rose up in what became known as the Freedon Nadd uprising, and King Omin, still wheezing inside his exoskeleton, performed the feat we flagged earlier in this story. He summoned the spirit of Freedon Nadd back from chaos itself, one of the only recorded jailbreaks from the Sith Hell. Even relocation to another moon and burial inside engineered vaults could not sever the bond between the Whispering King and the bloodline he had spent centuries farming. And the cult around him proved just as stubborn. Nadd worship persisted in the underground of Iziz for generations, complete with hidden fortresses, dark side war machines, and Omin's own secret life support sanctum. An entire shadow civilization, organized around one dead man's voice. His final masterpiece arrived a year after the uprising. An ambitious young Jedi cracked open the Duxan tomb, and the waiting spirit adopted him on the spot. That Jedi was Exar Kun. Nadd steered him straight to Korriban, engineered a cave-in around him, and then offered survival at a single price: full surrender to the dark side. Kun paid it, but the student repaid his teacher in the truest Sith fashion imaginable. Once Kun reached Yavin 4 and empowered himself with the ancient amulets there, he turned on the ghost that made him and destroyed the spirit of Freedon Nadd outright. This is one of the rare moments in all of Star Wars where a ghost itself is ended. Nadd's final words were a curse and a warning aimed at his remaining students. After 4 centuries of ruling from beyond, the Whispering King was silenced by his own creation. Even that was not quite the end of his shadow. His amulets and holocron became the most dangerous inheritance of the era. 2 cousins named Satal and Alima Keto jump-started their own dark side reign of terror on Empress Teta, using knowledge stolen from Onderon's Naddist relics, meaning the other major faction of the Great Sith War also traces directly back to Nadd's estate. And the Duxan tomb kept paying dividends long after its owner was gone. Centuries later, during the era of the Mandalorian Wars, that tomb still radiated enough dark side power to serve as a Sith ritual site. A wellspring outlives even the spirit that founded it. Haunted ground stays haunted. Step back and look at the full biography, and you realize Freedon Nadd ran the complete Sith Afterlife playbook in a single lifetime and afterlife. Tomb anchoring, dynasty haunting, a summons out of chaos, resurrection scheming, and the destruction of another spirit. Every trick the ghosts of later eras would use, Nadd ran first. But his greatest legacy was the monster he pulled out of that cave in on Korriban. Because what Exar Kun did with his teacher's lessons makes the Whispering King look almost gentle. The starfighters that destroyed the Death Star launched from inside a haunted tomb, and nobody in the rebellion had any idea. The great temple on Yavin 4, the base where Leia hung medals on Luke and Han, held a Dark Lord sealed within its stones. He had been in there for 4,000 years, fully aware the entire time. His name was Exar Kun, and his afterlife is the most famous ghost story in all of Legends. We already watched the ghost of Ragnos crown him and the spirit of Freedon Nadd corrupt him. Now we get to see what became of the student, because the way Exar Kun avoided the end of his life turned into the longest and loneliest sentence any being in the galaxy ever served. It began in the final hours of the Great Sith War. As Dark Lord of the Sith, Kun had enslaved the native Massassi race of Yavin 4 and driven them without mercy to raise colossal temples across the moon. Those temples were never simple monuments. They were dark side focusing arrays disguised as architecture, machines of stone built to channel power, with the great temple as the crown jewel. And in the year 3996 before the Battle of Yavin, the galaxy came to collect. Ulic Qel-Droma, freshly redeemed, betrayed his former partner and handed his location to the enemy. Kun watched the combined Republic fleet and Jedi armada converge on his moon carrying annihilation orders. There was no escape route left for his body, so he decided his body was the thing he could afford to lose. He gathered the surviving Massassi, the entire species he had already enslaved, and drained the life force out of all of them at once. Their end powered a spell that tore his spirit free of his flesh and bound it into his temple network. He spent a whole people like fuel, all to dodge the far shore and the pit beneath it. The Jedi above answered with a technique the galaxy had never witnessed before. They joined their power together and released it as a single cataclysm called the Wall of Light, and it scorched the jungles of Yavin 4 down to the bedrock. Kun's body burned away in that fire. His spirit did not. The Wall of Light slammed his temples shut around him like a lid. And this is where his story stops being a war story and becomes an afterlife story. Kun had cheated the natural order. He would never dissolve into peace with the ordinary souls, and chaos could not claim him because his anchor held. What he got instead was 4,000 years of solitary confinement. He had no worshippers left to feed him. He had no victims left to drain. A god-king was reduced to a whisper in empty stone while the jungle slowly grew back over his monuments. The moon around him only grew heavier with darkness as the ages passed, because Yavin 4 had been collecting it for a long time before him. Naga Saddam had arrived there after losing the Great Hyperspace War. Freedon Nadd had trained there. Kun had reigned there, and an entire species had met its end there before the Wall of Light scoured everything. All those layers compounded into one of the densest dark side deposits in the galaxy, which is exactly why the disciples of Ragnos would one day put those temples on their siphoning list. The prisoner slept at the center of it all, and history moved on without him. Then history moved back in. Around the time of the original film, the Alliance to Restore the Republic went looking for a hidden headquarters and chose the Great Temple. Rebel technicians ran cabling through a mausoleum. Pilots slept inside a Dark Lord's monument. When the Death Star arrived in the system, the strike that saved the galaxy launched from the front steps of Exar Kun's prison, and the dormant spirit slept straight through the most important battle of the age, happening directly above his head. He needed a different kind of alarm clock, and about 15 years later, Luke Skywalker unknowingly provided one. Luke chose that same temple as the home of his new Jedi Praxium, and in doing so, he filled Kun's prison with the one thing it had not held in 4 millennia: powerful, untrained Force sensitives. After 40 centuries of starving in silence, Kun woke up hungry. What followed showed the galaxy exactly what a Sith spirit does when the cell door cracks open. Kun invaded the dreams of the students. He posed as a wise ancient teacher offering forgotten knowledge, and he fastened onto the angriest student in the class, a teenager named Kip Duron. The trap he built around Kip is the clearest picture we have of how these predators operate. Kun found a young man with genuine grievances because Kip had grown up in Imperial spice mines while his brother was taken and pressed into service at a place called Karida. His anger was real and it was earned. So the ghost validated that anger, framed power as justice, and slid a weapon into his hand. Within weeks, under Kun's influence, Kip stole a super weapon called the Sun Crusher and destroyed the entire Karida system, erasing millions of lives in a moment. A ghost with no hands wiped out a star system. Sith spirits do not create darkness. They find it already growing and they invest in it. And Kip was only the beginning of the toll. Kun's manipulation ended another student named Gantoris, who built a lightsaber under the spirit's secret tutelage and was later found burned from within. The ghost summoned dark side beasts and conjured illusions against the students who began hunting him through the temple halls. When Luke Skywalker himself confronted the spirit, Kun demonstrated the true gap between them. His power struck Luke's spirit clean out of his own body. The most powerful Jedi alive dropped into a coma that lasted for days, while his consciousness wandered the temple as a ghost-like presence, perceivable only by his students and, in some accounts, by the spirit of Anakin himself. Luke received a preview of the afterlife without ever crossing over, his body breathing in a bed, while his soul drifted the halls unseen. But the confrontation that finally ended Kun required more than any single hero. Luke's students joined together, aided by a summoned spirit of their own, the ghost of Vodosiosc Bas, the old Jedi Master that Kun had cut down in life. Teacher and students raised a brand new wall of light inside the temple, the exact same weapon that had sealed Kun 4,000 years earlier, now aimed to finish him. The spirit was destroyed and imprisoned beyond any recovery, screaming 4 millennia after his body burned. The master he betrayed helped close the box, and the crisis reshaped the Jedi who survived it. Luke's new Jedi Order wrote actual doctrine on hostile spirits in its aftermath, with the Wall of Light as the textbook answer, and the whole affair forged Luke's famously redemption-first teaching philosophy. The soul of the modern Jedi Order was born in an exorcism, which leaves the question Exar Kun answers better than anyone in this entire story. Is the Sith version of immortality worth the price? Kun refused the far shore, refused chaos, and clawed out eternity on his own terms. And that eternity was a locked, silent box where nothing ever changed, and no one ever came. His great victory over the end of life was indistinguishable from the hell he was running from. Yet at the very moment Kun was sealing himself into stone, the partner who betrayed him was walking a completely different road toward the same destination. And the way the afterlife received Ulic Qel-Droma might be the most moving thing Legends ever wrote about what waits on the other side. On a frozen world called Renvar, in the ruins of a forgotten civilization, a man sat alone in the ice and waited for the end to find him. He had once brought the entire Republic to its knees. Now, he could not even feel the Force. His name was Ulic Qel-Droma, and his story answers the question every Sith chapter so far has been quietly raising. What happens when a fallen Darksider passes away after coming back to the light? Because Star Wars gives that question a definitive answer, and it might be the most moving scene in all of Legends. His fall began with good intentions. Ulic was a celebrated Jedi Knight who infiltrated a dark side cult called the Krath, planning to destroy it from within. The plan collapsed around him. The cult captured him, poisoned him with dark side toxins, and slowly consumed him with the very darkness he had come to fight. By the time the ghost of Ragnos branded his forehead in the streets of Sinagar, the infiltrator was gone, and a Sith apprentice stood in his place. As Exar Kun's warlord, Ulic conquered with the Mandalorians at his back and drove the Republic to the edge of collapse. And then came the moment that broke him. In the battle over the Jedi library world of Ossus, he crossed blades with a Jedi Knight who refused to stop pleading with him mid-duel. That Jedi was Kay Keldroma, his own brother. Ulic struck him down, and standing over Kay's body, everything inside him shattered at once. What happened next has haunted Jedi doctrine ever since. Nomi Sunrider, a Jedi Master and the woman who loved Ulic, unleashed one of the most feared abilities in the entire history of the Order. She severed Ulic from the Force, completely and permanently. The energy field that connects all living things went silent for him in a single moment, and he would spend the rest of his life deaf and blind to the power that had defined his existence. Hollowed out, Ulic gave the Jedi the one thing he had left. He betrayed Exar Kun's location, enabling the assault on Yavin 4 that we just watched end in the Wall of Light. So, hold that thought in place for a moment, because it matters to everything this video is about. The galaxy's freedom from Kun's living reign and the shape of Kun's 4,000-year imprisonment both trace back to the moment a Sith warlord chose grief over power. Then Ulic vanished. He drifted into self-imposed exile and finally settled in the frozen ruins of Ren Var, a man with no force, no family, and no purpose, waiting out his remaining years in the cold. Even there, the dead reached for him. But for the first time in this story, a spirit arrived in mercy instead of hunger. The ghost of his old master Arca Jeth, the same Jedi who broke the haunting of Onderon, appeared to the broken exile and urged him to seek redemption through inner strength. A teacher crossed back from the far shore just to tell a ruined student that his soul was still worth saving. And redemption came looking for him in person. Nomi's teenage daughter, Vima Sunrider, tracked Ulic down on that frozen world and demanded that he train her. Think about the shape of that arrangement. A man who could not touch the Force at all taught a young Jedi how to understand it, and in teaching her, he slowly healed himself. 10 years after the war, the ice around his life began to thaw. Nomi arrived at Ren Var seeking her daughter. A Cathar Jedi named Silvar arrived seeking something else entirely because her mate had fallen in Ulic's war and she wanted vengeance for it. Ulic refused to fight her. He stood there and absorbed her rage, attack after attack, until Silvar caught sight of the dark side rising in herself and stepped back from the edge. The last living author of the Great Sith War had become its last peacemaker. Then came the anticlimax that turns this story into art. A spacer named Hogan had ferried these visitors to Ren Var. He was a nobody, a starstruck fool with a blaster who realized exactly whose company he was standing in, and wanting to make himself famous as the man who brought down the great Ulic Keldroma, Hogan shot him in the back. That is how the Age's most consequential life ended, and Legends makes the point on purpose. The Force decides what a passing means, but any idiot can decide when it happens. What the Force decided is the reason this chapter exists. As Ulic faded in Nomi's arms, completely severed from the Force, unable to touch it for a full decade, his body dissolved into light, and he became one with the Force anyway. The witnesses on that frozen world understood the meaning instantly. Ulic could no longer touch the Force, but he understood it more deeply than any of them. And so the Force took him home. The severance was never a damnation. The light takes back its own. Sit with the staging of that scene because it is deliberate scripture. The shot rings out. Vima and Nomi rush to him, and the man the Force abandoned dissolves into light directly in front of the woman who severed him. The harshest judgment a Jedi ever passed was overturned by the Force itself in his final second. It is the closest Legends ever comes to stating outright that grace outranks punishment. There is a doctrinal bombshell buried in that moment too. Oneness with the Force is clearly not a technique. It is not a rank you earn or a count of midi-chlorians in your cells. It is a state of the soul. A redeemed man with zero Force connection achieved the peace that Exar Kun's bottomless dark power never could. And the whole era rhymes around him to drive the lesson home. His old master Arca Jeth had likewise vanished at the moment of his passing years earlier, at a place called Deneba, dissolving into light the same way. Across this entire age of Legends, the pattern never wavers. The selfless dissolve into light, while the selfish are chained into stone. Ulic even carried the proof of that theology on his own body once. He had worn a Sith amulet, the exact kind of relic that anchored other fallen spirits to the physical world, the same class of object keeping Karnes more predatory inside his talisman. At the end, that amulet held no claim on Ulic whatsoever. He had already let go of everything it represented. Anchors only bind souls that are still gripping back. And that is why Ulic's afterlife is so striking in a story crowded with screaming spirits. His afterlife is silence. There is no ghost of Ulic Qel-Droma haunting a tomb. There is no cult chanting his name in an underground fortress. There is no relic waiting to whisper to the next ambitious fool. After a life that broke the galaxy, the greatest mercy Legends ever gave him is that the end, for Ulic, was finally simple. He crossed to the far shore and stayed there in peace. But the galaxy itself was not finished weaponizing what waits beyond. Because 1,000 years before the films, a single ritual on a ruined world would prove that the crossing can be blocked entirely. 1,000 souls were about to find out that the door to the afterlife can be slammed shut from the outside. Deep in the caves of a ruined world called Ruusan, a circle of Sith Lords sat down together, joined their minds, and built a weapon out of pure dark side energy. When it went off, it did not burn a single body. It did something far worse. It ripped the spirits out of every Force sensitive within its reach and swallowed them whole, and it held those souls prisoner for the next 1,000 years. This is the thought bomb, the single most horrifying afterlife event in the history of Star Wars. The setting is the end of the new Sith Wars, roughly 1,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. On one side stood Lord Khan and his Brotherhood of Darkness, an army of Sith Lords who had abolished the old hierarchy and declared every one of themselves equal. On the other side stood Lord Hoth and his Jedi army of light. The two forces had ground each other down across the war until everything funneled onto Ruusan for the finish. And moving between them was a third player who despised both outcomes. His name was Darth Bane. Bane believed the Sith had grown weak through all that shared power, and he had already conceived the doctrine that would define the next 1,000 years of darkness: the rule of two. One master and one apprentice, with no room for anyone else. But before his new order could rise, the old one had to be erased completely. So Bane made his move, and it was a poison pill disguised as a gift. He delivered to Kon the ritual for the thought bomb, an ancient Sith technique of apocalyptic scale, knowing full well that Kon was desperate enough and arrogant enough to use it. Kon took the bait. In the caves of Ruusan, with Lord Hoth and 100 Jedi closing in to accept his surrender, Kon and his assembled brotherhood detonated the weapon. The blast consumed everyone. Roughly 100 Jedi and the entire Brotherhood of Darkness, Kon included, were caught in its reach. Those souls were not released into the Netherworld. They were not pulled down to chaos. They were not allowed to become one with the Force. Both armies, Jedi and Sith alike, light and dark together, were locked inside a silvery sphere of energy hanging in a cave, fully conscious, unable to move on. The Jedi trapped in there had done nothing to deserve it. They marched in to accept a surrender and were dragged into a spiritual prison alongside the very enemies they had spent their lives fighting. From a safe distance, Bane watched it happen and walked away satisfied. In one stroke, the Brotherhood was extinct. The idea of equal Sith was buried, and the rule of two era began. That is the lineage that ends with Palpatine and Vader. The modern Sith Order was founded on top of a mass soul trap, and Bane built his new empire of two in the crater of Kon's failure. The trapped spirits did not sit quietly in the dark, though. Over the following millennium, their swirling energy transformed that cave system into one of the most powerful Force wellsprings in the entire galaxy, a place where a Force user could amplify their power 1,000-fold. The site earned a name: the Valley of the Jedi. Pilgrims sought it. The Jedi of Bane's era prophesied about the battleground and legends of the valley as a place of destiny spread across generations. Ruusan's scoured surface became mythology, and almost nobody who told those stories understood the truth underneath them. The galaxy's greatest power source was a grave that had not finished closing. Beings who fell before the Republic even took its final form were still conscious in that cave while the Ruusan Reformation reorganized the government. While that Republic rose and rotted and collapsed into the Empire, and while the Death Star was blown apart in a system nearby, 1,000 years of history rolled past overhead, and the soldiers of Ruusan were aware for all of it. Their release finally came about a year after the Battle of Endor, and it started with a betrayal. A blind Miraluka Dark Jedi named Jarek, a former Jedi archaeologist who had remade himself into an Imperial Inquisitor, discovered the valley's existence and set out to drink its trapped power and crown himself a God Emperor. To get the location, Jarek took the life of a farmer named Morgan Katan, who had learned the valley's secret and hidden it away, and that act created the exact man who would stop him. Morgan's son was Kyle Katarn, a mercenary and rebel agent who barely considered himself a Jedi at all. Kyle followed the hidden maps his father left behind, guided by recordings of Morgan's voice preserved through the family's droid. He dueled his way through Jarek's 7 Dark Jedi one by one. He faced the pull of the dark side inside himself and refused it. And in the heart of the valley, he cut Jarek down before the Inquisitor could finish drinking. At ground level, the battle for the galaxy's biggest soul prison was a son finishing his father's business. With Jarek gone and the valley's power unbound from his scheme, the imprisoned spirits were finally freed. 1,000 years after the detonation, 100 Jedi and an entire brotherhood of Sith at last passed into the Force. The largest mass soul release in galactic history, performed by a man who never asked to be a knight. Even then, the valley was not done with the living. The site remained a wellspring afterward, and its energy kept testing everyone who came near it. Kyle himself returned there at low points in his life, and in one of those visits, the dark side nearly claimed him inside the very place he had liberated, until a woman named Mara Jade pulled him back from the edge. Years later, the disciples of Ragnos added the valley to their siphoning route, feeding its power into their resurrection scheme and binding the 2 great spirit sites of legends into one story. The souls had departed, but the ground remembered. The thought bomb changes the rules of everything we have covered so far. Up to now, the afterlife has been a destination with 3 doors, and the only question was which one a soul walked through. Ruusan proved the doors can be locked from the outside. The crossing itself can be weaponized, and the wrong ritual can hold 1,000 souls hostage to one man's ambition. That crime sits at the foundation of the Rule of 2, the lineage built to produce a single perfect inheritor of the dark side. And 1,000 years down that line, the inheritor arrived. He studied everything the ancient Sith knew about refusing the end, and he spent his entire existence engineering ways to never walk through any of those doors at all. His war against his own mortality is where this story goes next. "980 years before the Battle of Yavin, on a barren world called Ambria, a young Sith Lord walked away from her fallen master. And as she walked, her hand twitched with a spasm that no one ever explained. Hold on to that image, because by the end of this chapter you will understand why it might be the most unsettling detail in 1,000 years of Sith history. Everything we have covered so far assumes that when the body fails, the soul goes somewhere. The selfless dissolve into peace on the far shore. The trained return as spirits of light. The damned are pulled toward the 6 gates or chain themselves to anchors to avoid the trip. But the dark side eventually developed a technique that rejects the entire system, and it is called essence transfer. This is the deliberate relocation of a soul out of a failing body and into a completely new vessel, whether that vessel is another living body, a grown clone, a crafted object, or even a machine. A Sith who masters it never has to face the Netherworld or chaos at all. They keep moving from body to body and century to century, staying one step ahead of the afterlife itself. Except the technique carries a catch that should terrify anyone attempting it. If the target host's will is strong enough to resist the invading spirit, the displaced soul has nowhere left to land. It falls, screaming straight into chaos. Every single transfer is a wager, where the pit beneath the afterlife sits on the table. And the ancient Sith played that game constantly. The early masters of the technique turned their own tombs into traps, haunting their sarcophagi and possessing the explorers who came digging, continuing their reigns through stolen bodies across generations. This is what actually waits inside those Korriban vaults we walked through earlier. Those tombs were never just haunted, they were baited from the beginning. The nightmare case study is a being named Karnes Moore. He was one of the original fallen Jedi exiles who forged the Sith itself, and he bound his spirit into an amulet called the Muir Talisman, an object with the power to dominate whoever wore it. Then he engineered something called the Rakul Plague, a Sith sorcery disease that transformed its victims into monsters under his command, which effectively gave a spirit on a necklace control over an entire spreading plague. His talisman kept him predatory and patient for roughly 4,000 years. During the era of the Mandalorian Wars, a Jedi agent named Celeste Morn became the object's long-term prisoner and warden, sealed away in stasis with the thing for centuries. The talisman did not meet its end until 137 years after the Battle of Yavin, when a descendant of Luke named Cade Skywalker finally destroyed it, closing out one of the longest single hauntings in the entire mythology. Then there is Darth Andedu, the self-styled immortal god king of Prakith, who mastered the transfer so thoroughly that he survived within his own preserved corpse and his holocron for millennia. His secrets were so coveted that Darth Bane himself raided Prakith to steal that holocron. Andedu's spirit fought for a new body during the theft and was ultimately destroyed. But his teachings lived on inside the device. They later allowed a dark Jedi named Set Hearth to hop through a series of commissioned clone bodies, discarding each one around its 30th year. He turned serial immortality into a lifestyle, funded entirely by a dead king's instruction manual. Which brings us back to Ambria and that twitching hand. The fallen master on the ground was Darth Bane, the architect of the Rule of Two, and the man who trapped 1,000 souls at Ruusan. When his own body began failing him, Bane attempted essence transfer into his apprentice, Darth Zana. Her will proved strong enough to hold him out. His spirit was seemingly destroyed, or cast into the very fate he had spent his life outrunning. Officially, Zana won the duel and the succession, but the text leaves that one sliver of doubt in her spasming hand, the possibility that the founder of the modern Sith rode along inside his successor and that the Rule of Two carried a stowaway. Legends never answers the question. The twitch walks off the page and into history. Strangely enough, this doorway between bodies is not exclusively evil, and the exception is worth knowing because her soul returns later in this story. A Jedi Knight named Callista Ming used a variant of essence transfer 18 years before the Battle of Yavin, pouring her spirit into the gunnery computer of an Imperial battle station called the Eye of Palpatine in order to sabotage it from within. She existed as a machine-bound spirit for over 3 decades, a hero haunting a weapon to keep it from firing. 12 years after Yavin, she crossed into the body of a willing Jedi named Cray Mingla, who was already slipping toward the far shore, and regained flesh at the cost of her own connection to the Force. The same technique that steals bodies in Sith hands became, in hers, a sacrifice made twice over. The afterlife apparently judges the intention behind the crossing, and not just the crossing itself. The Sith line kept refining the technique anyway, and the refinement ran straight down the rule of two. Darth Plagueis the Wise spent his life researching the manipulation of midi-chlorians, chasing the power to create life and hold off the end of it. The tragedy Palpatine recounts at the opera in Revenge of the Sith is, inside the universe, the origin story of the galaxy's most consequential essence transfer program, because Plagueis failed to survive his own apprentice, and that apprentice inherited all of the research. Palpatine took the ancient soul right and industrialized it. Where the old Sith bound themselves to trinkets and tombs, Sidious paired the transfer with modern cloning, building stockpiles of empty and genetically perfect vessels so that his spirit would always have somewhere safe to land. His plan was to make sure the far shore never received him at all. He even ran a smaller and crueler version of the program on his own staff. His chief superweapon engineer was a man named Bevel Lemelisk, and every time one of Lemelisk's designs failed, and thermal exhaust ports have consequences, the Emperor ended him horribly and then resurrected him in a fresh clone to try again. One failure earned him piranha beetles, while another earned him molten copper. Lemelisk went through that agony 7 separate times, and when the New Republic finally sentenced him for good, his last request was that they make sure to do it right this time. The technique's reputation traveled so far that even a Hutt crime lord named Durga Besadi Tai claimed to know essence transfer and threatened Lemelisk with it during a superweapon project. Whether the Hutt could actually perform the rite was never resolved, but the folklore of dodging the beyond had leaked all the way into the criminal underworld, and the tradition never stopped rolling forward. In the furthest future era of Legends, a Dark Lord named Darth Krayt obsessed over surviving his own failing body, and his dealings finally brought the Muir Talisman to its destruction. The last era of Legends was still fighting the first era's ghosts. Disney canon eventually adopted the whole concept under the name transference and named it as the exact mechanism behind Palpatine's return on Exegol, which makes this obscure ancient sorcery the load-bearing plot device of the entire sequel trilogy. Look across every user of this technique, and one pattern never breaks. Essence transfer buys time, and it has never once bought peace. Mur received 4,000 years imprisoned in jewelry, and Deddu received a corpse throne in a forgotten fortress. Bane received, at most, a hand twitch. Not one soul that ran from the afterlife ever outran it. And the man who bet bigger on that race than anyone in galactic history was about to put the whole system to the test. Because on the second Death Star, the Emperor was falling down a reactor shaft, and his spirit was already in motion. Every faction we have followed so far has been arguing over the same 2 doors. The Jedi release their dead through one, and the Sith claw at the other, refusing to walk through at all. But on a shadowy world called Dathomir, there lives a third tradition that never joined the argument. The Nightsisters of Dathomir practice something they call magic, and they are the only faction in all of Star Wars that treats raising the dead as standard military doctrine. Their power flows from a source unlike anything the Jedi or the Sith command. Deep beneath Dathomir runs a green, mist-like energy called Ichor, sometimes known as Spirit Ichor. It is described as an exotic manifestation of the Force, bound to the planet itself, to its trees and its mists, and most importantly, to the spirits of the Nightsisters' own dead. And because their magic is tied to Dathomir, and to their community of both the living and the departed, the Sith could never steal it. In a mythology where the dark side takes whatever it wants, the witches hold one of the only powers that cannot be taken. The galaxy learned what that power could do about 20 years before the Battle of Yavin, when Count Dooku decided the clan needed to be erased. He sent General Grievous and a full separatist army to Dathomir to wipe the Nightsisters out. And the witches answered with the chant of resurrection. The clan's eldest and most powerful witch, an ancient woman called Old Daka, chanted the ritual over the mummified dead of her people, and the army of the dead rose from its resting place. Desiccated Nightsister corpses reanimated as tireless, shrieking warriors and tore into Grievous's battle droids. Understand what you are picturing here, because it aired on screen, in canon, in an animated series made for younger viewers. The Separatists fought an army of the risen dead, and the undead only fell when Grievous's forces struck down Old Daka herself, because ending the necromancer drops the army she raised. The clan's leader, Mother Talzin, became Dathomir's answer to the Sith spirits we have been tracking all video. After the massacre of her people, she persisted largely as a spirit-like entity of green magic, able to take physical form when fed enough power. And she was also the tradition's great resurrectionist of the almost gone. It was Talzin who found her son after his fall at Naboo, because her son was Darth Maul. She restored his shattered mind and rebuilt his mangled body after a decade of mad exile, dragging him back from the very edge of the line the rest of the galaxy considers final. Her own endgame came a year after the massacre. Talzin attempted to complete her return to full corporeal life by draining the life force out of Count Dooku, and she came within moments of finishing the ritual before Grievous impaled her and ended her body a second time. Even then, she was not entirely erased. Maul preserved her remains, and Dathomiri magic kept whispers of her presence alive in the lore. The tradition survived its darkest hour through its youngest daughter. One of the massacre's last survivors was a young Nightsister named Merrin, and years later she mastered the chant of resurrection herself, raising her fallen sisters as weapons against intruders on her world, including a Jedi Padawan named Cal Kestis. But Merrin's story bends the whole tradition somewhere new. Her magic grows stronger through connection and belonging, and she is the only practitioner in this entire chapter that the story ultimately rewards. Then, 9 years after the Battle of Yavin, the tradition crossed into live action and went further than it ever had. On the extragalactic world of Peridea, 3 ancient witches called the Great Mothers, deliberately styled after the fates of Greek myth, allied themselves with Grand Admiral Thrawn. They applied the chant of resurrection to his fallen stormtroopers and created the Night Troopers, gilded and bandage-wrapped undead soldiers who reassembled themselves after being cut down. The most dangerous enemy of the New Republic era returned to the galaxy with a literal army of the dead marching behind him, and every beat of it flowed directly from 20 years of established Nightsister lore. So the map of the Star Wars Afterlife now has 3 roads instead of 2. The Jedi release their dead into peace. The Sith refuse the crossing entirely, and the Nightsisters recall their dead, dragging bodies and sometimes spirits back across the line to serve as tools, guardians, and soldiers. 3 factions ended up with 3 different answers to the same question of what a soul is actually for. But there is a cost buried in the witch's answer that the other 2 traditions never carry. Every single Nightsister resurrection is powered by loss. The chant only exists because the clan has so many dead to raise. Dathomir's magic is grief itself, sharpened into a weapon. And while the witches were raising armies from sorrow, the galaxy's greatest master of refusing the crossing was preparing the most audacious escape in the history of the Force. The Emperor's fall was coming, and he had no intention of staying down. The moment Vader hurled his master down the reactor shaft of the 2nd Death Star, Palpatine's spirit tore free of his ruined body. And what should have happened next was the very fate he had privately dreaded above all things, the plunge into the pit he was more religious about than his own skeptical teacher. Instead, his contingency fired. Clinging to existence through sheer malice and total mastery of the transfer, the Emperor's spirit hurtled across the galaxy toward the hidden deep-core fortress world of Biss, where a vault of young Force-sensitive clone bodies grown from his own template sat waiting. Legends told this story a full 28 years before The Rise of Skywalker ever reached theaters, and the Legends version is darker, stranger, and far more complete. The journey itself is one of the creepiest details in the entire saga. Between bodies, Palpatine's consciousness reportedly survived by briefly parasitizing a living host, with some accounts naming an agent called Jeng Droga as the vessel, while his loyalists ferried his essence toward Biss. Which means that while the galaxy lit fireworks over Endor, the Emperor spent the victory party as a stowaway inside a screaming man's mind. And Biss deserves a moment of its own, because this world was no ordinary hideout. Palpatine had spent decades marinating the entire planet in the dark side, slowly harvesting the life energies of its population, guarding its space with hyperspace anomalies, and purpose-building the whole world as both a fortress and a spiritual battery for his resurrections. He had not merely prepared clone bodies for his return. He had prepared a planet. When his spirit finally arrived, he woke up screaming in new flesh, decades younger, and the galaxy had absolutely no idea. While the New Republic celebrated for 6 years, the Emperor rebuilt himself in the dark. And for the purists keeping track, Lucasfilm's own continuity keeper confirmed that none of the Palpatines seen in the films were clones. The clone saga begins strictly after Endor, which keeps his fall in the movies fully authentic. 6 years after his supposed end, the reborn Emperor revealed himself and unleashed his dark empire on the fractured galaxy, wielding horrors like the World Devastators and the Galaxy Gun. And then came the twist that defined the entire storyline. He captured Luke Skywalker, and Luke knelt. The son of Vader apprenticed himself to the Emperor, gambling that he could destroy the operation from the inside. The gamble half failed. The dark side took Luke deeper than he ever intended to go, and it took Leia resisting Palpatine face to face and reclaiming her brother to pull him back into the light. Together, the Skywalker twins forced the Emperor's spirit out of the husk it was wearing, because there was a flaw in the machine, and it was fatal. Palpatine's own colossal dark side power burned through his clone bodies, aging and rotting them at horrifying speed. His brand of immortality came with a treadmill attached, and he needed fresh flesh constantly just to stay in the race. Then his own inner circle cut the supply line. An Imperial sovereign protector named Kana Jax bribed the Emperor's physician to corrupt the genetic material of the entire clone stock. One by one, the remaining bodies failed on their own or were destroyed by traitorous dark Jedi. The immortal Emperor was suddenly running out of skin to wear. That is what finally drove him to Korriban, to the pilgrimage we glimpsed earlier from the outside. Trapped in a single, rapidly decaying body he could not replace, Palpatine descended into the Valley of the Dark Lords and begged the ancient spirits in those tombs for a way out. Their verdict was monstrous. His soul could survive only by seizing a new vessel of extraordinary potential, and the vessel they pointed him toward was the infant Anakin Solo, Leia's newborn son. So the endgame unfolded on Onderon, the same world where a whispering king once ruled from beneath a throne. Palpatine cornered the Solo family there, and Han Solo shot the Emperor down. But ending the body had never been the problem. His spirit lunged for the baby, one possession away from another century of horror wearing a Skywalker bloodline. What stopped him is one of the great unsung sacrifices in all of Star Wars, a Jedi named Empatogaios Brand, a crippled survivor of Order 66, who was slipping away from his own wounds in that very moment, threw his departing soul around Palpatine's spirit like a net. And he dragged the Emperor into the netherworld of the Force with him. Denied any anchor, denied any host, denied every last clone, and bound tight in the grip of a Jedi's final act, Palpatine's spirit at last faced the thing he had spent a lifetime engineering escape routes from. The crossing was real this time, and beneath it waited the madness he had always known was coming for him. In Legends, this is the Emperor's true and final end. It happened 11 years after the Battle of Yavin on Onderon, and it was delivered not by a lightsaber, but by a blaster shot and a self-sacrificing soul tackle. Run the accounting on his whole program, and the numbers are almost pitiful. Every superweapon, every clone, every stolen body, and every corrupted world bought the most powerful Sith in history exactly 7 extra years. And decades later, when a new trilogy needed to explain how its villain survived a reactor shaft, the storytellers reached straight back into this playbook. The clone bodies, the hidden world steeped in darkness, the plan to possess a young successor, and even a Skywalker tempted at the Emperor's side all reappear beat for beat. When we reach Exegol near the end of this story, you will recognize everything, because Legends ran the whole blueprint first. But before the story of the dead arrives at the sequel era, it has one more Legends door to open. And it is the strangest door of all, because behind it the living learned how to walk into the afterlife itself and come back out. Deep in the Legends timeline, Star Wars did something no other era of the franchise ever dared. It let living heroes walk into the land of the dead, speak with the loved ones they had lost, and walk back out again. The realm is called Beyond Shadows, and the road to it begins in the most dangerous place on the star map. Hidden inside the maw, a lethal cluster of black holes near Kessel, drifts a derelict structure called Sinkhole Station. And squatting aboard that station is a cult of Force sensitives known as the Mindwalkers. Their creed, repeated among them like scripture, insists that life itself is nothing and that only the Force is real. Their technique is called mind walking, a meditation that separates the consciousness from the body entirely. The mind crosses over into Beyond Shadows, while the abandoned body slumps in a chair, slowly wasting away. Many of the Mindwalkers were blissfully meditating themselves toward the end, their bodies going skeletal while their minds toured eternity, a deliberate nod by the writers to the lotus eaters of ancient myth. These were people so in love with the far shore that they were starving on this one. Luke Skywalker came to that station carrying a heavier burden than most. Decades after his war with the reborn Emperor, Luke had been exiled from the very Jedi Order he built, blamed for failing to prevent the fall of his nephew, Jacen Solo. Jacen had turned, taken the name Darth Caedus, ignited a galactic war, and met his end as a Sith Lord. So Luke and his son Ben set out to retrace Jacen's journey and understand what broke him. And that trail led straight to Sinkhole Station, because Jacen had learned mind-walking there years earlier. Father and son crossed over together, and what they found on the other side changes everything we thought we knew about this afterlife. Because beyond shadows has geography you can actually walk. There is a font of power and a pool of knowledge, twin engines of temptation that had nearly hooked Jacen on his own visit. There are the mists of forgetfulness drifting at the edges, and at the center of it all waits the single most emotionally loaded location in all of Legends. It is called the Lake of Apparitions, a still and dark stretch of water whose surface holds the faces of the departed. Walk across that lake, and the dead rise to meet you. Luke and Ben walked across it. The first face to rise belonged to Anakin Solo, Ben's cousin, and once the brightest hope of the Jedi Order, gone since the war against the Yuuzhan Vong. He greeted them warmly from the water. Then came the face that stopped the most composed Jedi alive, dead in his tracks. Mara Jade Skywalker rose to the surface. Luke's wife, Ben's mother. She had been taken from them both by violence, and at the sight of her, Luke physically stumbled in the lake. A husband and wife who never got to part properly were given the goodbye that had been stolen from them. And then came the thunderbolt. Jacen Solo himself rose from the water. The man who fell as Darth Caedus appeared completely at peace, restored to the person he had been before the darkness, and he insisted that a glimpse of a hopeful future, a vision of his daughter Alana ruling over an era of peace, had guided even his fall. Crossing over had returned him to the light. Sit with what that implies for everything we have learned about the three roads. Meeting your end as a Sith Lord did not automatically drag Jacen into the pit. The arithmetic of redemption on the far shore is far more complicated than a simple ledger of light and dark, and it appears the Force weighs the final state of a soul. The question our scholars argued about earlier finally has a case study, and the case found mercy. But the lake gives with one hand and takes with the other, because beneath its surface wait the depths of eternity. During a later expedition, when a group of Sith crossed over alongside Luke, one of their number, a captain named Liha Faal, was seized by the long-departed enemies of her own past and dragged under the water. And in the physical world, her perfectly healthy body convulsed and gave out on the spot. Whatever happens to your soul beyond shadows is fully binding on your flesh. A person can meet their end in the afterlife before their body ever fails, and something far worse than drowned grudges was hunting in that realm. Lurking at the lake's edge, inside the mists of forgetfulness, was a primordial, tentacled entity of pure hunger called Abeloth, a being imprisoned within the maw itself. since before recorded history. She lured mindwalkers toward her the way an anglerfish lures prey with a light. The land of the dead had an apex predator, and she was using the afterlife as a hunting blind to reach the living galaxy. The war against her came to a head a year later, and part of its final battle was fought inside Beyond Shadows itself. Destroying Abeloth required light and dark working in unison, so Luke allied with the most unlikely partner in all of Legends, the Dark Lord of the One Sith, Darth Krayt, the same obsessive we last saw chasing his own failing body through the far future of the timeline. And when the balance of that fight tipped, it was the spirit of Mara Jade who intervened from within the realm to help finish it. Luke's departed wife helped save the galaxy from inside the afterlife. Every chapter of this story until now has been about the dead reaching into the world of the living. Beyond Shadows reversed the door completely. Star Wars let its greatest hero stand in the land of the dead, hold a stolen goodbye with his wife, question the fallen, and learn that even the damned can find their way back to peace. Nothing else in the franchise ever went this far. The only territory left to cover is what the modern era built on top of all of it, because the mystic realms of the new canon were drawing from this same deep well. The modern era of Star Wars never stopped building on this foundation. Across the Clone Wars, Rebels, and the Ahsoka series, the new canon quietly assembled its own map of the borderlands. And the first landmark on that map is a place where gods can fall. It is called Mortis, an ethereal realm within the Force itself, shaped like a world but existing outside normal space, possibly outside the galaxy or the universe entirely. 3 beings known as the Ones dwelled there. The Father held the center, the Daughter embodied the light, and the Son embodied the dark. And it was on Mortis that canon staged its first true resurrection. When the sun struck down Ahsoka Tano, the fading daughter's essence was channeled through Anakin's hands and into Ahsoka's body, restoring her to life. Take a breath and absorb what that means for everything Ahsoka does afterward. She has already crossed the line once. Every mission she runs, every duel she survives, and every life she touches from that day forward happens on borrowed time, gifted by a fading goddess. Mortis revealed something else while Anakin walked its surface too. The dead spoke there freely, from a vision of his mother Shmi to warnings delivered through the voice of Obi-Wan. The boundary between life and whatever comes next runs thinner in some corners of the Force than others, and Mortis sits directly on the seam. The second landmark surfaced decades later on the world of Lothal, hidden behind a temple painting of those same 3 gods. When a young Jedi named Ezra Bridger unlocked that gateway, he stepped into the world between worlds, an extra-dimensional plane inside the Force, built like a star field of glowing pathways and doorways, each one linking a different moment in time and space. The sacred Jedi texts called it the Virgins' Scatter, and it is explicitly described as a conduit between the living and the dead. Ezra proved it with the most audacious save in the entire franchise. Peering through one of its portals, he watched Ahsoka's duel against Vader on Malachor playing out in the past. And seconds before the final blow could land, he reached through the doorway and pulled her out. The galaxy had spent years believing Ahsoka fell on Malachor. In truth, she was rescued by a hand reaching backward through time, which makes her survival, mechanically, a resurrection by time travel. The woman revived by a goddess was saved a second time by a doorway, and she was not the only one who understood what those doorways were worth. Emperor Palpatine learned of the realm and burned Imperial resources, hunting for a way inside, attacking Ezra through the portals with sorcerous fire. A conduit linking every moment in existence would hand its master control over mortality itself, and even at the height of his living power, Sidious was already tunneling toward eternity. Ezra sealed the gateway before the Emperor could break through, and considering everything we watched that man do to escape the crossing, the galaxy will never know how much horror that one closed door prevented. Ahsoka's strangest visit to the realm was still ahead of her. 9 years after the Battle of Yavin, a fallen Jedi named Baylan Skoll struck her down in combat, and instead of waking on the far shore, she awoke inside the world between worlds. Waiting for her there was Anakin Skywalker, 5 years gone from the living galaxy, appearing as her final teacher. He ran her through one last lesson that swept across memories of the Clone Wars, testing who she had become, until Ahsoka made the choice to live and return to her body in the physical world. Star Wars had filmed a near-death experience. The realm functioned as the border crossing between life and whatever waits beyond it, with a dead man standing post as the border guard. And his appearance raises the juiciest open question in the modern canon. Was that truly Anakin's spirit using the realm, or a memory, or something in between the two? The storytellers deliberately left the mechanism mystical. What is certain is that a Jedi who no longer lives actively trained one who still does, and the student who walked out of that crossing carries the teachings of the dead alongside the life force of a goddess. One last figure belongs in this story, and he might understand the crossing better than anyone we have met. On the planet Attalon lived an ancient being called the Bendu, the self-described one in the middle between the light and the dark. When Grand Admiral Thrawn's forces finally brought him down under massed fire, the Bendu did not plead, and he did not fall silent. He laughed. He told the Empire that they could not truly end him because he stood beyond their power to destroy. And then he vanished from his body entirely, leaving Thrawn and his gunners staring at empty ground where a giant had just been. Whatever the Bendu actually was, he treated the end of life as nothing more than a door. And after everything this galaxy has shown us, the trapped armies and the whispering tombs, the lake that returns stolen goodbyes, and the spirits who walk back from the far shore to guide the living, the Bendu may be the only one who was never afraid of it.